Africa. Welcome to the Point of News on KTN News tonight. This is KTN Weekend Prime. My name is Yvonne Okwara Matole.
My name is John Alanamu. We've got lots of stories for you, including the politics around the sugar deal, sweet or sour. That's for you to decide. The politicians have already drawn their lines in the sand. But tonight, we're taking a different perspective on this conversation.
That's true. You've heard from all the politicians. In fact, you know which MPs support the deal from which region. You know the members of parliament from the other region of the country that support the deal. Now, there's been a lot of political rhetoric surrounding this, and today we're going without the politics, and we want to take a look at this sugar subsector and really analyze, because I believe this controversy gives us time to reflect on the sugar industry. And it's not just sugar that's important, maize too. SGR is going all the way into Uganda, and so this means we're opening up our markets and also opening up the Ugandan market to some of our produce. We will be taking a look at some of these issues. Let's just take a look at our Super Bowl now on just where we are with the sugar subsector in this country. Now, I want you to reflect on this figure for just a moment. This is how much it costs to produce a ton of sugar. 87,000 shillings per year. Now, you'll take a look at how much it costs other countries within the region, John. It will surprise you. Almost half of that. And that is where part of the problem lies, and this is what we're going to be discussing today. We've got economists on Checkpoint. We have Anzet Sewere and we have Karidi Murimi, both of whom are no stranger to Checkpoint. And today, it's not about which politician supports this deal or not, because a lot of that time it's glossing over the issues.
Up in there, and as it should be about the hard facts. The fact that countries with a lower per capita income are producing more sugar at cheaper rates, and that's something that we need to be able to face. It's something that's been staring us in the face for a long time, at least within the statistics that have been produced by COMESA.
That's absolutely correct. So we'll be getting into that, because remember, no matter which side of the political divide you're on, the cost of sugar remains the same. Whether you support the ruling coalition or the opposition, the cost of sugar is the same at the coast, in Western Kenya, in Central Kenya, in the capital. So this is something that affects all of us, and that is why we'll be getting to the bottom of these issues. But, of course, it's not just that. We have also the day's top stories, and here they are.
Munajua matatizo ya kilimo ya miwa ililetwa na watu ambao waliagiza sukari kutoka nje, wakakuja wakaweka katika mifugo ya Mumias, wakaenda wakauza dukani na supermarket. Miwa ya mwananchi inaoza shambani.
If there is that agreement which was signed, to be set aside immediately.
Sweet or bitter, the sugar deal with a divided opinion.
Lakini siasa ya kutumika, nataka niombe viongozi wenzangu tuachane nayo.
Wooing the Western region, why some court MPs are now dancing to Jubilee's tunes. From bad to worse, no doctors in sight in Nakuru despite a return to work agreement. And 2 people die in Mombasa as strong winds sweep across the coastal town. Thank you for joining us on the program tonight. Our sign language interpreter is Meresha Owiti. Let's begin with the intrigues surrounding the Uganda sugar importation. And Deputy President William Ruto is now faulting the opposition over what he terms as double standards on the Uganda sugar deal.
The DP is accusing some court officials for the downfall of Mumias Sugar Company and insists that the government is committed to the prosperity of the sugar industry.
Now, at the same time, the Union of Sugar Plantation Workers wants the government to halt the deal, which it says will deny its members their livelihood.
KTN Sharamomani begins our coverage tonight.
Rounding up his political tour of the Western Sugar Belt region, Deputy President William Ruto continued his mission of sweetening the sugar deal that has gone sour.
We are the government of Kenya first, and our interest is Kenya first, not any other place. Sio kama tunaelewana. Hiyo biashara nyingine huyu Khalwale anasema ni mambo ya uongo. Ati tumeenda kuongea mambo sijui ya biashara sijui gani. sijui mambo ya biashara gani. My friend, let us speak the truth.
And the gloves went off as the war on the Kenya-Uganda sugar deal turned into a political boxing ring. Perhaps unexpected is how local leaders, who form a bedrock of support for the opposition, seemed to be on the government's side of the ring.
Waizi wenye maangusha Mumias sugar yetu wako ndani ya kodi. Waizi wale waliuza shamba yetu ya Nasewa, and Mheshimiwa Boni can bear my witness. Ni rafiki yake mkubwa sana. Ni principal wa kodi.
Munajua matatizo ya kilimo ya miwa ililetwa na watu ambao waliagiza sukari kutoka nje, wakakuja wakaweka katika mifugo ya Mumias, wakaenda wakauza dukani na supermarket. Miwa ya mwananchi inaoza shambani. Ni kweli ama si kweli? Na hawa watu tunawajua.
Ukifika mambo ya kutafuta huyo mwizi, hao watu wa ODM hawaongei, wananyamaza. Lakini wakisikia sukari imetoka Uganda, wanasema acha tutumie hiyo kupata mileage ya kisiasa.
But the Kenya Union of Sugar Plantation Workers has termed the move to import quote-unquote cheap sugar from Uganda as an act of economic genocide. They want the details of the agreement between Kenya and Uganda to be made public.
We are asking as quickly as yesterday, if there is that agreement which was signed, to be set aside immediately. Let the stakeholders be called for a discussion.
The cost of production ya miwa hapa kwetu iko juu sana. Ni jukumu yako kama serikali kuhakikisha kwamba vitu yenye nafanya bei ya sukari iwe juu, wewe kama serikali ile itwe chini. The first one, mko na taxes mingi sana zenye mnauliza wakulima mpaka wanakatwa na wanapata DR. Hizo taxes serikali toa ama punguza.
But Ruto has remained adamant that the idea of sugar from Uganda being cheap is sheer politics.
There is no way you can bring cheap sugar from Uganda. It's not possible. Because the cost of production in Kenya is the same as the cost of production in Uganda. So the only sugar that will arrive here cheap is sugar that comes from elsewhere. It cannot be sugar from Kenya or Uganda. Na ile tumekubaliana na serikali ya Uganda ni kwamba we are going to have a joint board. Kwa sababu tunataka kuhakikisha kwamba ile cheap sugar from elsewhere is not packaged as Kenyan sugar and sold in Uganda, or packaged as Uganda sugar and sold in Kenya.
We have to face it. Kenya is a net sugar importer. So the sugar will come in. All we ask for is a fair market.
The sugar deal is one that has formed the center of a political tug of war, at the fulcrum of which lies huge economic and social implications. Sharma Manyi, KTN News.
Lots of political posturing with regard to that sugar. Remember that discussion tonight on Checkpoint is devoid of politics, so tune into that for the facts about the sugar deal and sugar in this country. But meanwhile, we roll on with some other of the political speak in this country. The Deputy President's 3-day tour of Western Kenya ended today in Matungu, Kakamega. But the political tone of his charm offensive has been far from subtle. The Jubilee government is wooing the region. One is allied to CORD, and the political intrigue surrounding the Uganda-Kenya sugar deal have already drawn the line between the government and the opposition.
He came, he saw. Even though the Deputy President's agenda in Nambale, Teso and Matungu was primarily development, it's impossible to ignore the fact that the Western region is still on the ruling coalition's wish list.
Wale wanapangia eti watafanyia siasa hii mambo ya miwa, they are wasting their time. Because we know what we are doing. Ile president na serikali, tulikubaliana serikali ya Uganda na serikali ya Kenya. Kwa sababu nyinyi watu wa Mumias, hasa watu wa hapa Kakamega, munajua matatizo ya kilimo ya miwa.
Sisi tunataka tuunganishe Waluya, wa Kikuyu, wa Somali, Kenya mzima, tuende barabara moja.
And already Jubilee's political muscle is growing stronger. Leaders from this region, perceived to be a CORD stronghold, already divided on the most recent intrigue, the Kenya-Uganda sugar deal. CORD stand has sharply criticized the government for a deal that would allow imported sugar from Uganda into Kenyan markets. MPs of the Western Caucus snubbed the president when he called for a meeting. However, today, some were marching to a different drama.
Mimi sio mganga vile, lakini what you know, that 2017 hakuna code.
Mwelekeo mimi na iko na hakika mwelekeo utakuwa kwa serikali ya kusema na kutenda. Tuunge serikali mkono 2017, wote tupikie Jubilee kura. Kuanzia kwa MCA, kuja kwa mbunge, kwenda kwa governor.
Where Kakamega Senator Boli Halwale's allegiance truly lies is hard to point out.
The opposition of yesterday is the government of today. And the opposition of today is the government of tomorrow.
Kwa heshima usamehe wale walikufungia kwa choo, na ikiwezekana ukiwasamehe mkuwe mandugu, lakini kura usiwapatie.
But here, where the subject of Luhya unity in the wake of 2017 is a persistent one, it's evident that CORD stands to lose ground. But one thing most people agree on is that they still have the right to question or probe any deal the government makes in their name. But has the deputy president really conquered this region?
Ni kama watu wanatudanganya, lakini ukweli hiyo sukari si mbaya.
Hiyo itatuletea shida sababu soko itakuwa haitatembea sukari yetu vizuri.
Mimi ni mtu wa CORD. Kabisa. Damu.
All right, you've heard the political speak around the sugar deal, sweet or sour, that's for the politicians to decide, but the facts remain unchanged. At least they have done so for about 7 to 10 years.
Absolutely. It's been 10 years of trying to safeguard the sugar subsector in the country. What have we achieved with that? That is now the big debate, and that is where it lies. So I want to take a look at that a little bit, and what sugar is coming into the country and how we're able to protect that, especially under the COMESA Common Market Protocol. So this is what happened. In 2002, we got into a sugar protectionist sort of measure that was granted for 1 year, and the idea was that we would cap the amount of sugar that was coming into the country to plug our deficit, but the aim of this was to be able to grow the sugar subsector, to make the necessary changes in infrastructure and institute reforms like privatization of the sugar industry. So we got this measure granted for 1 year. 1 year later, exactly, we said not enough had been done. The deal was extended for yet another year. Let's go to 2004. Sorry, yes, to 2004. We got a second extension of these safeguards within the COMESA region for another 4 years. 2008, here we were again saying not much had been done during this period of time. We asked for yet another 2-year extension that expired last year. That was in February 2014. Now at this point, we again got them renewed. Now it just kept going, and they've been renewed until 2017. Now even this goes against the World Trade Organization's protocol that says give an economy or a subsector 10 years. Beyond that, you need to start questioning whether indeed the reforms are being put in place, and some of those are falling behind schedule, and they included privatization of the 5 sugar companies that are there in the country at the moment. Now, because all of this is about sugar within the COMESA, but let's take a look at trade specifically between Kenya and Uganda, because this controversy then touches on the trade ties and of course regional integration. That's the East African community. But before we get there, yes, I'd like to talk about how much Uganda and Kenya are producing. So Uganda produces 650,000 tons of sugar per year. They're consuming just about half of that, 320,000. That means they have a surplus of 145,000 tons, which is why they've been saying we have a surplus, and regardless of the COMESA safeguards that are put in place, The fact that they have a surplus should render those an illegality, and that's why they want their sugar coming into the country. Let's take a look at Kenya's situation for a moment. We are currently producing 600,000 tons of sugar, and with those COMESA safeguards, we have a cap on sugar imports at 300,000 tons a year. Now, back to what I was telling you earlier about the trade between Kenya and the countries in the region, because it opens up a bigger discussion on that. Now, as of 2014, Kenya exports to Uganda and Tanzania goods worth 105 billion shillings. The imports from the two countries combined comes to about 27 billion shillings. So you can see that huge trade deficit, and these are some of the reasons why they had the bilateral talks in Uganda to try and balance this trade out a little bit. So now you understand what's going on. But then let's go back to sugar for a moment, and then just look at how competitive we are in terms of production of sugar in the region. Now, it costs 87,000 shillings per ton to produce sugar in this country, and this is where some say this is actually the crux of the matter. Let's compare that with just one country in the region, Malawi. Look at that, half of how much it costs to produce that here, 30 to 35,000 shillings per ton. What ails the sugar sector? Some, of course, talking about the high cost of production. These are some of the issues that we were supposed to have put in place when we asked for year-on-year extension of those COMESA safeguards. Of course, the poorly funded government-owned factories having aging machinery that is prone to breakdown. Now, we're supposed to have sold about 51% stake in the 5 sugar millers. A part of that was supposed to have gone to the farmers. We're lagging behind in this region, and this is why this discussion today isn't about who supports it, but it's about understanding that, because consumers in general, if you use sugar, this is a discussion. Then also the implications of the trade between Kenya and Uganda and EAC integration, which, by the way, is at the heart of President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy. This is something that he holds dear. So now we're going to be talking about the relations between the two countries, trade ties, and just what is missing from this conversation. Right now, it's not about which politician is saying what. It's about all of us understanding that and then holding our respective governments to account. So, of course, we want your views on that. The hashtag is Checkpoint from wherever you are watching us across the region in East Africa, as we have this discussion with our two economists later on.
Very interesting, Yvonne. I mean, if we're looking purely at the facts, then that discussion would have ended at the end of this. At the end of the Super Bowl, we're not competitive. Therefore, we need to be able to increase our competitiveness. But laying the context, of course, is really important, devoid of the politics that which seems to be subjective at this time and fairly short-sighted as well.
Yeah, and, you know, just to add, we can ask for extensions only up to a certain point. We can keep saying we don't want the sugar from Uganda only up to a certain point. We can say we don't want sugar from Brazil only up to a certain point. And so inward reflection is perhaps what is important in this discussion right now.
All right. Let's move to another story, though, that has been holding national attention, at least for the people of Nakuru County. And services there in public hospitals remain paralyzed after nurses fail to report to work. This despite the Kenya National Union of Nurses having called off a 5-day strike with a return-to-work deal with the county government. And as Fatma Paula reports, most public hospitals hospitals in Nakuru rather are unoperational.
At the Rift Valley Provincial General Hospital, John Gugi sits here unattended and in deep pain. He was involved in a road accident at Njoro town. His brother Zakaria Wainaina tells us that he first took him to Ruma private hospital before bringing him here because he could not raise the 6,000 Kenya shilling fee needed for an x-ray. Hours later, his brother is yet to be attended to.
Kaambia huyu sisi hiyo pesa sina, haya turudi huko tuone wanatusaidia namna gani. Sasa tumekuja tukaambiwa makamani. Matatu. Sasa vile niligonga gari nyingine. Sasa vile nikamtia kiti vile nikagonga chuma hii kiti.
The scenario repeats itself at the Bahati Sub-County Hospital. Those who came here were met with closed gates. While others opted to go home, many more chose to stay. Eunice Komboka, who traveled all the way from Lanet County, is among the many hopeless patients in various public facilities across Nakuru County, as operations remain paralyzed by the nurses' strike. The hospital staff downed their tools 5 days ago, demanding, among other issues, to be paid their promotion arrears and allowances.
So nimetravel kuja hapa, nimefika, nimenock milango kadhaa hapa, sijapata mtu ndani almost 15 minutes, so ninajaribu kuulizia, wananiambia they are operating, lakini unfortunately sijapata usaidizi wote so far.
According to the Kenya National Union of Nurses Nakuru Branch Secretary Cyprian Odera, the nurses had agreed to go back to work, but most of them have since not reported because they have traveled to various destinations. Fatma Pole, KTN News.
Let's take you to Mombasa County. 2 children have died there after a tree fell on them while sleeping in their house last night. The tree fell as a result of strong winds that blew in some parts of Mombasa. John Juma reports.
Pain and agony written all over their faces. They are the latest victims who've lost their 2 children following the wrath of Mother Nature. The unusual strong winds blew in Mombasa last night, bringing down this gigantic mango tree. It fell right on top of nearby houses.
Nilikuwa nimeketi hapo nje kama saa 4 za usiku hivi, nilisikia mwembe ukilia, nikiangalia nikaona unakuja, mimi nikaruka na watoto walikuwa wako ndani.
At the time of the incidents, 3 children were sleeping inside one of the houses. A 15-year-old boy in class 8 and a 2-year-old boy. They both died, but one survived and is still in hospital.
Waliokolewa, mmoja akiwa yuko ameumia, wawili walikuwa wamekufa.
The strong winds were not anticipated since there was no advisory from the weatherman that Mombasa would experience abnormal winds. Kenya Red Cross officials say at least 3 incidences were recorded in Mombasa, 2 in Mshomoroni and 1 in Likoni, where rooftops were blown away. Other businesses were also affected. Kisauni Area Legislature Rashid Bedzimba says this is an awakening signal for the county's disaster preparedness.
Upepo wa jana haukuwa kawaida. Hatujawahi kupata upepo aina huo. Hatujawahi. Hiyo upepo huwa tunasikia sehemu za juu, lakini hapa pwani bado. Kule tunasikia mashule zimetolewa mapaa. Hapa pwani haijawahi kutokea, lakini jana imetutokea. Kwa hivyo tuko macho sasa kuangalia kwamba disaster team itaingia, ione itaweza kutatua matatizo namna gani.
This comes barely 3 days after 7 pupils drowned in Diani following high ocean tides. The locals are now urging the weatherman to furnish them with up-to-date predictions, more so when safety precautions need to be considered.
Na hawakutueleza kama kutakuwa na upepo mkali namna hii. Wale watu wanatabiri, wanastahili pia kujulisha wananchi mambo kama haya inapotokea, angalau pia na wao wawe macho.
Je, kama ingekuwa watoto wangu wanapita hapa akienda shule, singekuwa ni janga kubwa? Sasa mimi ningeomba serikali, hata county government itusaidie. Miembe kama hiyo, ile miti kwa barabarani ambayo wanaona ambao haifai, tuondolewe ndio kesho tusije tukapata janga kama hilo.
John Juma, KTN News, Mombasa.
Let's go back to Nakuru County, where residents of Naivasha Estate were treated to rare drama as faithful of one of the leading churches clashed over leadership and ownership of the church. Blows were exchanged and insults traded between the rival groups as faithfuls and other onlookers watched in shock. The incident at African Inland Church in Kasarani Estate forced police to fire in the air to scatter the 2 groups. And trouble started after a group identifying itself as the real owners stormed the church, demanding the removal of a local pastor who had been posted to the area.
Baada ya mwaka 4 nimekuwa kukuja kila Jumamosi. Kwa hivyo hakuna siku nimeshalewa. Na nikajenga kanisa lilipokuwa kubwa pale, walianza kuleta pasta ngine. Walikuwa na njia kunyakua kanisa. Kwa hivyo nilinyakua kanisa, nilienda kidogo na nikafikiria nirudi kanisa.
Sasa mpaka mahali tumefikia wametunyakulia kiwanja na tunataka aondoke hapo atuachie kiwanja yetu.
All right, from acrimony there to celebration and good cheer as thousands of Hindus from Nairobi marked their yearly mass wedding. Over 8,000 Hindus from the Sri Kachi Leva Patel Samaj community in Nairobi today converged at the temple to mark the ceremony, which is in its 21st edition. 23 couples exchanged vows in the Hindu tradition, with brides donned in various gowns bedazzled with gold and silver instead of the usual white dress. The ceremony, known as Samu Lagna Mahotsav, is held en masse in a bid to cut costs for the wedding couples. Now, during the ceremony, the bride and groom take 7 sacred steps after the tied knot, with each of the steps representing a vow, namely those of strength, nourishment, happiness, long life, prosperity, and understanding.
We started this group wedding ceremony 21 years ago. We were thinking that rather than wasting time and money, we better request the young upcoming couples to participate these noble ideas.
This is the message to the other community and other group of various people or 190 at large, that if we do such for different community, it will be not only save the time and money, but also, you see, it will gather the people together.
Former President Daniel Arap Moi has called on Christians to be at the forefront of the fight against tribalism and other social vices in the country. Moi said Christians should be role models and set good examples, and that there will be no tribal groupings in heaven as written in the Bible. Moi said this during a church service at the AIC Kabarak Chapel in Nakuru County, where guest choirs from various churches entertained the congregation. The former head of state also donated an ambulance to assist in the movement of Kabarak University students to nearby hospitals in Nakuru town.
Christians ought to know that they should be the first to set a good example. People talk about tribalism and all that. In heaven, there will be no place for Kalenjin or Kamba or Kikuyu and all this. No. Children of God. Children of God. And we should set an example from now, not to wait until we go to heaven.
We hardly navel gaze here on KTN Weekend Prime, but one tweet will break that for us this evening. Shiro says to Yvonne Okwara, thanks for breaking it down to us like a 2-year-old, awaiting your studio think tank guests to enlighten us.
Yeah, we hardly do that. But yes, today it's not about the politics, so please do join us at the other side of this break. What's been missing in the conversation on the sugar importation deal? Remember, next will be maize. It's a whole other
coffee.
Discussion. There's coffee,
Most of our cash crops will be liable to be analyzed in such a way.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see you at the other side of the break. The hashtag is Checkpoint. You can also SMS on 22155. So what really ails the sugar sector? That is what we're discussing on Checkpoint today, and we feel that the controversy surrounding the sugar sector has given us an opportunity to delve into these matters and have greater understanding for all stakeholders, not just in Kenya, in Uganda, but what this means also for regional integration in the East African community. My guests, Karidhi Muremi and Anzet Sewere, thank you both for coming. Let's start off with what's been missing from the debate. Obviously, there's been a lot of political rhetoric, a lot of counter accusations back and forth. But Muremi, what's the big thing that we've been missing from the conversation surrounding this supposed deal on sugar importation?
In very simple terms, there are two things we are missing. The first one is that it's not a new debate. To say that COMESA has been with us from 2000 is a fact. to say that the free trade area was accepted by COMESA in 2000 is a fact. Therefore, indirectly, we have had 15 years. So one of the bigger questions is what we have been doing with 15 years. So that's one area which is missing. The other one which is more fundamental, and this is where some of us have a lot of question marks with the MPs and all those political class, is that Wajiko in 2010 actually passed a constitution which in Article 2.5 basically says that all international agreements are part of the laws of Kenya. It went on to say in Article 2.6 that all treaties that we have so far signed will actually form part of our laws. So one of the bigger questions is that if you are a Western Kenya MP or any of those areas, why did you allow your people to vote yes if you knew that we have indirectly constitutionalized the East African community, the COMESA, the EPAS, and all those trade negotiations that Kenya as a country had already signed? So those are the two big issues which we are missing in the whole debate. And to be honest with you, the reason why CS Amina and the others are saying that there was no agreement signed is because the issue of an agreement was domesticated by our own MPs long before the 2010 Parliament, when we domesticated what we call the East African community, when we set what we call the East African Parliament, when Kenya nominated its own MPs to join the East African Parliament, when we domesticated the East African Protocol, when in January 2005 we passed the customs union under the community. So what our president was basically asked in Uganda was, why is Kenya introducing a non-tariff barrier in a protocol already domesticated by your parliament?
Okay, all right. And we'll come back to that. But let's talk about, before we get into the sugar sector proper and some of the agreements that we have signed on to, but are yet to do our end of the deal. But Anzeta, these regional trade obligations, if anything, this whole controversy has just exposed how tricky that is, meeting those regional trade obligations versus, of course, safeguarding, the rights and, of course, also the protections of locals.
Yes.
Because that's what we're talking about now. We're saying, okay, we're part of the EAC, but what about our farmers? What about our locals? So talk to us about the intricacies of that, because that's become apparent now.
I think you have to understand that when countries get into regional agreements, there are two tensions that they have to resolve. One is leveraging economies of scale and becoming a bigger market for products, freedom and free movement of goods and people, making it easier to do business. But the other are the sort of the sovereign interest and the interests of that nation in particular. So as Kenya goes into these negotiations, those are the two tensions that they have to resolve. So this sugar issue is just sort of highlighting those two tensions. On one hand, we have a local sugar industry that we want to protect. On the other hand, we do have a good deal coming out of Uganda, possibly, that we've been taking advantage of for a long time. So I think those are always the conversations as you go in. And also you need to understand that as the dominant player in the East African region economically, sometimes we have to make concessions on certain things in order to build our soft power, to build our geopolitical control, and as well as to build, a sense of goodwill between nations. So sometimes there'll be considerations out of economics when different countries come together to make agreements. So there is always that dance that government has to do as they get into regional agreements.
All right, let's talk about how it's been handled, by both sides of the political divide in Kenya. What this also says, like we'd alluded to earlier, about our trade relations, about our regional integration. We have our viewers watching in Uganda now. What must this be doing, for this region from both sides of the political divide?
I think the problem that I've been having with this conversation is that we're not looking at how we're contributing to this problem. We've made this an issue about Uganda. And the real issue is the problems within our own sugar sector. Because if you look at the sugar issue, if I could just go into that for a bit, the reality of the matter is that Kenyan sugar is very uncompetitive. And in fact, the estimates that I have is that it takes $500 to produce a ton of sugar in Kenya. It costs $180 in Uganda. So why shouldn't we be taking that advantage? Isn't that part of the economies of scales that we are trying to get to
through these regional agreements? Shouldn't we be making it more affordable for Kenyans to live? And some economists are of the view that we shouldn't be complaining about cheap sugar from Uganda. This is good for consumers in Kenya, particularly for low-income consumers at the bottom of the pyramid. It makes sugar more available to them, where 20 and 30 shillings is a big deal for them. So why are we penalizing low-income consumers because of the internal problems we have around managing our sugar industry? So there are concerns that we're making this about Uganda, when really the issue is, why is Kenyan sugar uncompetitive? As you said rightly, with the commerce, we've extended and extended and extended. We're not fixing it, and then government comes in and puts in 1 billion into Mumias. People would argue that money could be used, better elsewhere. And also the other thing that sort of becomes interesting is that there's this impression that perhaps government wants to flood the market with cheap imports, but government introduced raised duty by 130% on imported sugar. So there are efforts on the part of government to try and protect the local industry from foreign competition. And of course, some people are saying, well, government shouldn't be doing that. If our sugar industry is not functioning properly, can we get that up and running so that we can compete with the likes of Uganda and produce well?
That's right. Murimi, why is our sugar industry so uncompetitive? We've had these safeguards for over a decade now. We've sought an extension. What's the problem?
The problem is we haven't accepted the problem. That's where the problem is. If you don't define your problem, then whatever solution you are coming up with, you'll fail the test. Kenyans need to know that from 1989, when the debate of structural adjustment came into Kenya, one of the crops that we deliberately as a country through politics avoided to touch was sugar. So we handled maize, we handled wheat, we handled those type of commodities, but sugar somehow has always been left hanging. The research that has been carried by different economists, World Bank included, indicate that one of the reasons that was kind of agreed is because sugar is a very easy way of funding what you call politics. So what I'm saying in short is that as long as the politician wants to have a poor person to use correctly, then the problem of sugar will never be fixed. Why on earth would somebody not be introducing horticulture in some of these areas?
Precisely.
Why would you not allow them to grow soybeans? Why do you want them to grow a crop which permanently makes them poor? What is the rationale? So to my mind, we need to almost open the truth. And if you want to understand Kenyan agricultural sector, what we basically did is immediately after independence, the so-called white farmers were using, in quote, the raw labor cost of the African. They were also using indirectly very protective policies, indirectly to become who they were. After independence, the large farms went to selected Kenyans in whichever name. Those Kenyans, unfortunately, formed the bigger part of government. So the word subsidize, the word give me this price per kilo has always been a negotiation, not for the consumer, but for the big. We call it the problem of the colonial farmer being practiced in a political modern Kenya. Now, to come back to your answer, what we are basically dealing with is you have very small rad sizes. So to mechanize those areas becomes a question mark. You have very inefficient sugar yields, which questions the research capacity on the sugar field, which brings to a question mark on Kenya Sugar Board as an institution. Then you have a ministry in terms of agriculture, which uses the same yesterday, thinking they'll get a new today. So you have policy disconnect between what they think they are doing and the reality on the ground.
All right.
Then you have the hidden one, and the hidden one is what we are discussing. You have politics crowding the solving of the answer.
All right, and how have other countries been able to do it much better than we have? We know what's happening in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Malawi. I mean, there's several other countries in this region that are doing much better than we are. Tanzania, obviously, the issue of subdividing of land, isn't such a problem as it is in Kenya, for example. I mean, and year on year, we keep, we subsidize seed, and this is not just for sugarcane, we subsidize fertilizer. During the planting season, we've even seen in Kenya where people say, where's the seed? Where's the fertilizer? Are we going about this the right way?
I think the reason why this is also such a touchy issue is that we're dealing with the land issue, or we're not dealing with the land issue. As he rightly stated, a lot of sugarcane farmers are smallholder farmers, right? Which often, and the other issue is that they're smallholder farmers and they often don't have title for their land because the land is subdivided in the spirit of inheritance. So although they're using the land and they feel that they own it, they don't have the title that they can then go to the bank, get credit, get the inputs, and make their farms more efficient, etc. So there are a lot of people, first of all, using very inefficient and traditional farming methods, which means that they're very low yields and the sucrose content of the sugarcane isn't as high as it should be. And in fact, one of the questions that have been asked to Kenya is, why aren't you guys changing the variety of sugarcane you're planting so that you charge as to how much sucrose is in it rather than the weight of the sugarcane itself.
Right.
And these are some of the issues that we're not really getting to the bottom of as we're speaking on this issue. So I think unless we deal with the land issue, because the other issue is when you don't have title and you're a smallholder farmer, you can't conglomerate many different smallholder farms into a larger farm that can be run more efficiently. So part of the problems that we're seeing that are structural in the way land is used in Kenya is feeding into the inefficiencies of the sector. Then you add the issue of inputs such as electricity. And if you look at some of the machinery in some of our factories, they're very old, they're very aging, which makes them very inefficient.
Right.
So there is also questions of how will this money that Mumias is getting be used? What's the best method of using it? Are we going to buy a bunch of new machines? Are we going to restructure management? Are we going to get new people in there? There are all these questions around how do we best use that money, given the reality that on the ground getting sugarcane out of the land is quite difficult and quite ineffective and inefficient.
What should we have done in all this time that we've been asking for safeguards from COMESA? We know about restructuring the industry, improving infrastructure, privatization. Murimi, just tell us where we should have been with that and what more we need to do, because we've extended this until 2017, but surely if we haven't done this again by then, just perhaps for the average viewer watching today, what we can start to hold our government to account, if it's privatization of the firms, if it's, taking a look at that, and while we're privatizing one, here's Mumias again needing a bailout. What were we supposed to have done during this time, so that we can just start to accelerate that?
There are basically four things that we need to get right. The first is that we should not hide the reality. The reality is that COMESA is there and the East African community is there. Once you agree with that, then the next question you ask yourself is, what is the current information that you should be using to help your farmers move to what is commercially viable? And that to me is where the whole question of leadership comes in. Because in our own Vision 2030, we actually identified that we will move agriculture to commercially viable agriculture. So having agreed with that vision philosophy, you don't then have to give the word sugar, maize, wheat a personal emotional attachment. What you need to do is to remove yourself from emotion and reorganize the solution to where that rad is sitting. So if you have areas like, if we become personal, we say Mumias as a zone. And I agree that the population in that area does not allow them to have lesser sizes of rad. Then can I move the skill? In other words, can I move those farmers to the corridor of Ramu where they can grow sugarcane, but now the rad mass is bigger? The government is doing a Garana 1 million irrigation, those type of questions. So that the philosophy of the constitution that you can own rad anywhere in Kenya is implemented by getting skilled sugar farmers to go and start good sugar farming in another corridor. In the meantime, those who do good beans like soya can move back to these other areas. So the whole chapter 5 implementation in terms of the RAD chapter is basically what I'm trying to bring to the table. because we need to respect that Wajiko has actually spoken. These things are sitting in the Constitution. Is getting the courage and the character to do the implementation. So that's one. The next one is the whole area of what we call selfish interest in terms of what is it that you are defending. The only reason Uganda is raising temperature is because you have interested political interest sitting in Mombasa, either in terms of lorry owners, either in terms of grain handling facilities. Those interests are the ones causing the noise that we are basically tending to talk about. So the second thing is we need to remove what we have always used since independence, which is going to parliament so that you become rich by putting laws and incentives which are personal to what you own. So we need to learn away from that. And that's where the word privatization technically comes in, because are there people wanting sugar industry to go down so that the unit cost of the asset to be privatized is lower,
yes.
And therefore I buy.
Right.
And if I buy, am I buying the factory or is it the empty rad I want? Because you can transform, you just need to put your mind in Kiabu, where the so-called coffee is now housing estates. So may you be having those behind-the-scene type of machinations which people are playing around, but using you as a poor voter to think that they are on your side.
And I'd like to just interrupt for a moment, because that has come up in the discussions and the heated rhetoric that we've seen across, the better part of last week. And it's talking about this and saying sugar barons. Now it's become one side saying, but the sugar barons funded the campaign of one area. Others saying no, but it's the sugar barons. Do we know this sugar barons?
Officially, don't go around in circles. Officially, Parliament has the names. Remember, there was a parliamentary committee on sugar specifically, and specifically they went all the way to Mombasa. They actually opened a go down. Some of the MPs were even threatened. So it's not something that is not in the public domain.
So why can't we fix it? Why can't we name the barons and start?
Understanding is this. The country that you are calling Kenya, unfortunately, has educated children. So part of the new debate we are having is because the children from Western Kenya are now asking some of the fundamental questions. And the politician may not have very far places to go hiding. The Parliamentary Accounts Committee, the Parliamentary Investment Committee have enough data on which sugar company, which sugar farmers, and all those things. If you are thinking an answer to this problem, and I'm from, let's say, Mumia's farmer growing society, and note I'm using the word farmer. Mumia's My Factory has been put on maintenance. The best I can do is to go to the Ministry of Agriculture and say, my president says we can import sugar from Uganda. Can you give us a license to import as farmers?
Exactly.
The moment the word farmer imports that sugar, then the word baron will disappear. But remember, for this one to disappear, politics will suffer. And the farmer will become richer because he's now the one making the profit.
Okay, let's talk about information, that is available even to farmers. And this is something that you've mentioned, Murimi, quite a bit. We're giving subsidies on seed, on fertilizer, on that sort of thing. Are we building that capacity amongst the farmers? And also in line with information, that seems to be the one thing we can't seem to get a hang of. Do we have a deal? Do we not? What was signed, if at all? Between whom? Government to government, that sort of thing.
I think the first issue in terms of farmers, I think you need to understand that often when we say we're subsidizing seeds or fertilizer, etc., sometimes that is not realized on the ground in terms of farmers actually getting access to that. So one of the biggest problems that smallholder farmers have is getting access to affordable inputs to make their crops efficient. So I think what needs to be done, or what has been done, and what needs to be sort of unraveled and implemented, is why some of these subsidies that have been, theoretically introduced, not being felt on the ground by farmers, because this is a serious issue and a serious concern for them, because it affects obviously how much money they get at the end of the day. And I think in terms of information, there is the information present, but I think what is done is just as he's been alluding to, there's an obfuscation of the issue. There's a cloud of secrecy that goes through it, and it makes it difficult for you to go through and say, okay, where do I do this? How do I get that? And how do I do this? And I think that's why I'm saying that this is an internal Kenyan problem. Uganda should not be in this debate in any way whatsoever. We should not be talking about Uganda. Uganda is not the problem. The problem is what we're doing internally as Kenyans. And I think that's why, it's being politicized, because perhaps people are trying to, divert attention from what should really be talked about.
All right, and it's been said that this is being politicized simply because we don't have enough information on this. I think the president says we have a deal, we're going ahead with it because this is in the best interest of the country. We'd rather get sugar from Uganda than from Brazil. And then we have the cabinet secretaries saying, well, technically no deal was signed. Do you think if we actually knew what happened in Uganda, that this debate would be...
It wouldn't be, because we have a sugar deficit of 210,000 tons. Like, we don't have enough sugar in this country, so we need to import it, So if the issue is that we're importing sugar, well, yes, because we're not producing enough sugar in the first place. So I don't think really the issue is whether sugar is coming in. I think it's the vested interests and the sort of the seditious nature of the interests of people within the sugar industry that are making people divert attention from the fact that we have an inefficient sector, we are not producing enough sugar, our sugar is uncompetitive, our factories are not working properly and mismanaged, we're using aged equipment, we have very expensive electricity, and all of these factors come together to make sugar a very expensive product for Kenyans to consume. So the question is, even if we were to import all of Uganda's surplus, that wouldn't feed our deficit.
It still wouldn't.
That's the reality, So we do need to import sugar. So I think people need to stop sort of looking at this as a Uganda issue, and sort of look at it as, this is a sugar deficit we have, these are the problems in the sugar industry, how do we resolve them without politicizing everything?
Marimi, it's not just about sugar. There's maize as well, and once we start with the SGR, and once that gets into Uganda, surely something will be leaving on that cargo train into Uganda, and from Uganda back into Kenya. Maize is also another hot button issue, isn't it?
In fact, let's put the facts on the table. What basically happened in Uganda is not a secret. We had both Kenyans and Ugandan business people. The first round of the meeting, which happened in Serena Hotel in Kampala, was the equivalent of what we call a KEPS round table with the ministers of the two countries. It is in that discussion that the Ugandans raised the sugar, and our minister, who is Amina,
responded,
said we will look at it.
Right.
Not we have this agreement, but we'll look at it. When that was raised, Kenyans then raised the issue of chicken. Okay, the chicken has been a major issue. Right from the Kenchicks, the Mogokos, we have serious farmers in Bugoma who produce excess chicken and they can't take it to Uganda. So that's the one we are calling meat, but it's basically the chicken area which was raised. So the day two, the two presidents then received what indirectly was the summary of the private sector discussion. So coming back to the table, maize has been raised by Uganda. They have asked, why is our maize not being allowed to enter Kenya? On the account, currently we are using the word moisture. For sugar, we stopped the sugar from Uganda in 2011 through KRA. What Uganda has done, when KRA invoked the banning, they used the COMESA regulation. They said COMESA gives Kenya a quota, and that quota has been exhausted, so we can't allow you to come in. So the Uganda minister then invoked what we call the East African Community Protocol. They said we are going to report Kenya to WTO for bringing in an untariff barrier. Now, once you hear WTO, that's a world issue. And therefore, it starts bringing a different angle altogether. For the president, he's managing the total export as a volume. So he's not looking at whether it's sugar or tea. He's saying my volume of exports is going down, my imports are going up, my currency is going down. So that's what the president is managing in total. So when we come to the detail for this country are basically one. For how long do you continue indirectly managing what seems not to be profitable? And for how long will you have poverty as a leader to a point of wanting your people to continue in poverty. Because it's not a question of producing sugar or producing maize or producing wheat. It's a question on, are our farmers having information to do the profitable farming they should do?
Absolutely.
And to me, that's where the word policy comes in.
Uh-huh.
How do you remove the yesterday interest of those who own large tracts of land who have been using government to give subsidies for their own personal benefit?
Okay.
Because unless you unlock that, this animal we call 50% poor Kenyans will never disappear.
Absolutely. And I'd like you to hold that thought because we want to take a short break right now on Checkpoint. We'll be right back and we will start focusing on trade within the region and the tariff barriers and the non-tariff barriers that exist, because remember, this again is an East African discussion. We'll be back with Checkpoint in a few moments. Some of your feedback on our SMS line 22155. Suman Damwe says the sugar problem is not about land issues. It is about both technical and operational efficiencies. We have focused on production rather than productivity, and this is where we lost it. Imports is a secondary exogenous variable. Keep your comments coming in as we discuss this sugar deal between Kenya and Uganda and whether, as Anzetsa says, Uganda should even be part of this conversation. We'll get back to that in a minute. But of course, this focuses on, where we are as a region. And Anzetsa, I'll start with you in terms of opening up our markets within the East African region for free movement of goods and labor. This, of course, points a little bit to that. Where do you think we are with that?
I think, well, if you're looking at Uganda specifically, they have a trade deficit with us. So if you look at the balance of trade between Kenya and Uganda, we definitely export a lot more than we import from them. But I think the concern that I'm having with this conversation is that it's creating tension between Kenya and Uganda in an unnecessary manner. There's already been tension around the SGR between Kenya and Uganda, and for us to make this a political issue that adds even more fuel to the fire rather than looking at it as the purely economic issue that it should be, which is why is our sugar uncompetitive. And in fact, the real question for me, if I was a Ugandan, would be, well, we got into the EAC because we wanted to leverage economies of scale. The same way Kenya wanted, us to open their markets for their goods and services so that we could make more money. It's the same way Uganda wanted Kenya to open up our market so that we could get our products and services in there as well. So why do we suddenly start having double speak in a deal that could be even good for the poorest consumers who could possibly have more affordable sugar? But more importantly, why is it that we want it to be a one-way street when it comes to certain issues? So yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Moremi, where does this leave us with East African communities integration?
I think in terms of the country, the choice of the trade policy that we want to pursue is now known. And I think the part that our current president is basically implementing is a continuity of what the coalition government indirectly over-discussed. The idea of strengthening the community, strengthening COMESA, and trying to position Kenya to take full advantage with the whole population that is available for us. So as a policy, we need to be clear that we are going for opportunity selection. And I think what we then need to do is to reposition our population in terms of availing opportunity information to them. What is this trade information that they need to exploit so that as they grow, they also grow in the way the country is growing. And the country is growing on a regional integration policy. That's the path we have chosen. So regional integration is our way to go. For us to grow the country, we need to know what is competitive elsewhere. I would want us to be very radical in the way that Uganda, and if we use the word Western, is one zone. So me as a farmer in Western can actually do farming in Uganda. And that person I'm calling exporting can be myself. So that we don't have to permanently relook our brains and rock them in only one location. Because that's how economies grow. So if you look at Coca-Cola, we drink it in Kenya, but the owner is sitting in Atlanta on the other side. So the country called Kenya, the people we are calling good, should be made good in everything, including exploiting those opportunities in other markets.
All right. Does this sugar deal matter? Deal or no deal? Is this the crux of the matter?
I think it matters because it's going to force us to be a bit more self-reflective, and I would encourage people to first of all do some reading on the subject. Don't just take what politicians say on TV, etc. There is information online. East African has written about it, The Standard has written about it, The Daily Nation, Business Daily, even, you know, international newspapers. So what I would say is, can we get the politicians to stop looking at this as a Uganda issue and start scrutinizing them on the internal dynamics that I've mentioned, that he has mentioned, so that we can move this conversation in the right direction instead of, you know, sidelining and giving distracting sideshows for people to look at.
Where do we go from here? Because right now, we have a deal, we don't have a deal. Politicians are on one hand saying, in fact, members of the court coalition are saying, if this deal is not brought to a stop, they're going to court. But where do we go from here? What is that information that we need so that even when the various politicians from either side of the divide come for a rally, what is that thing that the citizen is saying, oh, you've said that, but wait, hang on, there's 1, 2, 3.
What I would want to encourage is the ministers of agriculture in the 47 counties, because agriculture, remember, is a devolved function, should start exposing the East African Community Protocol, what we call the Custom Union Agreement, to their population. Let the people understand the inside of that protocol. That protocol is not hidden, it's even in the website. So the governors, through their ministers of agriculture, can start indirectly exposing that information to the population. That will allow the national MP, in quote, the senator, to be questioned that you are the house that passed this. How come now you are pretending that you are doing something better for me? So that we shift the debate from noise to facts. The facts is Parliament endorsed and approved the East African Protocol. All MPs, all senators, including the current ones, are aware that we read East African budget on the same day because of that protocol. There are duties we cannot pass because of that same protocol. The second thing we need to do is to get out from what I would call non-public participation. Let's put the issue on the table. I have been a farmer in this item called sugar. I've been a farmer in this item called maize. For those many years, I don't seem to be growing rich. What should I grow so that the population started demanding what I would call absolute truth on doing what is right for there? The third, which the ordinary population should start doing, is to revisit the existing agricultural laws and policies. Because what we are doing without our understanding is that we domesticated the protocol, but we are still having the old ways of talking to the ordinary farmer. So the ordinary farmer seems to think that there is a battle. But the actual protocol says origin of all goods from East Africa will be described as local. That's what the protocol says.
All right.
So even the sugar we are making noise in the protocol is Kenya
local.
sugar under the definition of the word local.
I see.
So that's what I'm saying. Let's help Kenyans to indirectly internalize. You only grow rich if you dislocate. Okay, that's why Abraham had to go very far. So let's start getting our people knowing we have Kenyans growing palm oil in Uganda to reduce the cost of palm oil in this side of the country.
All right.
Our farmers, please, if it's cheaper to grow it out there, let's go and release those rats. Let's conquer other nations. Let's not be so domesticated in local might that our politician is holding us. Remember the East African Protocol, the second phase is political federation.
Yeah.
So we have finished with the Union of Customs. We are now going to whether we should have a president for the zone.
For the region, yeah.
So our population, especially the youth, please go ahead and take advantage of this animal you're calling importation. Go out, go to your WESO fund, go to your youth fund, go to your women fund, start asking the Ministry of Agriculture, we hear you are giving licenses to import 300,000 tons. Can we have a license as Corridor Youth Group code, whatever it is?
Okay.
Then the last point which she mentioned, which is very fundamental, and Kenyans need to debate it in a sober way. The fact that I have protected your industry does not mean everybody is gaining. That poor person who buys sugar, if he is losing 30 bob per kilo because of you being protected,
okay,
we need to calculate for the Kibera person, for the Madare person, that poor person, why are they suffering?
Exactly.
They can't educate their children
because of
so
this.
that
Because of
I
this.
allow you to continue importing.
And for me,
and
that's
then
the
finally,
issue.
for the MPs, and this is a Kenyan request, can we demand that the risk, not of the agreement, of the people they are calling sugar barons, can we demand they list them for us?
Okay, all right. And that's it?
And I think this is, and for me, this is a broader story, is that why are we penalizing Uganda? Why are we having a conversation where we want to penalize Uganda and protect Kenya from cheap imports? We should be celebrating that there's cheaper sugar. That should be something that we'll be relishing in, you know. And rather than propping up an industry that we're not looking at the lack of competitiveness, the inefficiencies, the management issues and the mismanagement issues, we keep on giving them money to prop up an industry. And the other issue that he mentioned is that why are we looking at the sugar belt as it can only grow sugar in that belt? There are other ways that we can begin to phase in more productive crops into that part of the country, so that if Uganda is good at producing sugar, let them produce the sugar.
Then
we'll
we
import
produce
it.
what we're good at producing.
then we figure out what we're good at producing, and let's sell that to Uganda. So we shouldn't make this a battle, you know, we should come together a bit more.
All right, and on that note, we wind up Checkpoint today. Thank you very much, Karithi Murimi and Anzetse Were. You now know where you stand. Do you stand on each side of the political divide, or do you stand on the side of productivity and, of course, affordable goods? We'll get to your feedback in just a moment. But John Alanamu, following the discussion, what's the point?
Interesting discussion that should have happened a long time ago if we are to be able to get our cash crop and subsectors in order. But there's a couple of points that came out of this discussion very salient, and perhaps the first one, dealing with what's happening right now in the political sphere, is that politicians are selling all sorts of lines for Kenyans to buy. A caveat should be entered: buyer beware of the politics that is at play and has been at play for the past number of years with respect to the sugar subsector. Has it helped increase or improve the position of farmers? Has it helped improve the position of consumers? If it hasn't, then let's listen less to the politicians and look more at the facts. And secondly, what if we want protection as a country, as we have asked for over the past 10 to 15 years, as was mentioned, under different kinds of protocols, then why aren't we doing the work? Are we doing the work to make our industries more competitive? Are we improving the infrastructure, the machinery that we use to make our sugar more productive? Why is it that sugar in Malawi, a country that is far less rich than Kenya in terms of the per capita of that country, is able to produce sugar cheaply? Why is it that our neighbor Uganda, who has a worse balance of trade than Kenya, is able to produce sugar cheaply? We should ask ourselves these questions. Finally, again, just to press that point, we ask ourselves, why is Kenyan sugar not able to compete with sugar from other parts of the world? Why is it that we continually ask for these kinds of extensions, yet for year in, year out, we are not able to reimagine our industry and make sure that everybody in the value chain, from farmers to consumers, gets their worth in terms of the shilling that they are spending either in the farm or in the supermarket buying sugar goods from Kenya? We need to be able to look at this debate focused and without the noise that politics sometimes brings. And that is the point. Let's keep our focus on the region for a moment, and President Uhuru Kenyatta is in Addis Ababa ahead of Monday's deadline for South Sudan's rival forces to strike a deal to end the civil war there. IGAD leaders hope President Salva Kiir and former Vice President Riek Machar will sign a lasting peace accord. But the question is, will this new deadline face the same fate as previous ones set by IGAD?
Just a month after South Sudan's 4th independence anniversary on July 11th, and IGAD leaders meet yet again, seeking to help Africa's youngest nation to achieve peace. President Uhuru Kenyatta is among these leaders, meeting under the international mediation team IGAD+. South Sudan President Salva Kiir has arrived in Addis for the talks, which IGAD chief negotiator on South Sudan peace talks Seyum Mesfin says will be successful.
There is no quick fix to achieving peace that would transform South Sudan into a durable peace and constitutional rule-based nation.
South Sudan presidential spokesperson Ateni Wek Ateni had earlier been reported to have said that Vice President James Wani Iga would act on Salva Kiir's behalf. Kiir and former Vice President Riek Machar were supposed to have started face-to-face talks on Thursday to resolve a number of contentious issues and sign a final peace deal before the August 17th deadline. The 20-month-long conflict in the world's youngest nation has killed tens of thousands of people and displaced over 2 million others. International pressure is increasing on South Sudan to find a solution to a conflict that broke out in December 2013 between forces loyal to President Salva Kiir and fighters allied to former Vice President Riek Machar. Multiple ceasefire agreements have been broken and rounds of peace talks have faltered.
The struggle was not about position. The struggle was about the interests and the prosperity of the people of South Sudan.
Last month, U.S. President Barack Obama held talks in Addis Ababa with leaders in the East African region concerning South Sudan's crisis. Following the talks, the two warring factions face an ultimatum of August 17th to accept a regional peace and power-sharing deal.
War has never benefited anybody. Peace is what your people fought for their freedom for. They did not fight to shed blood. They fought it to have peace and to have prosperity.
There appears to be only two scenarios. Either the parties agree on the proposed compromised agreement or opt to continue on the path of war. Ellen Wanjiru, KTN News.
World Junior 2,000-meter steeplechase champion Consulas Kipruto will be making his second appearance at the World Athletics Championships when he lines up in the 3,000-meter steeplechase in Beijing. Kipruto won a silver medal at the previous championship in Moscow, losing to veteran water and barrier star Ezekiel Kemboi.
He's a world youth and world junior champion in the 2,000-meter steeplechase race, but Conseslus Kipruto is yearning for a world championships title in the senior ranks more than anything else. The 22-year-old will be heading to the world championships for the second time.
Last time was in 2013 when I was silver medalist, and then this the second time. I'm aiming now to be world champion. 2013 I was in good shape more than Ezekiel, but that kind of experience, so it put me with experience. So I think according to this one, I learned that in championship we must use our minds.
Nairobi Champions Cup round of 16 matches entered its second day with different teams fighting for a spot in the quarterfinals. Dandora Youth overturned a 3-1 scoreline to defeat Naivas 4-3 in a game of 2 halves. In other matches, Uprising Youth beat Dortmund United by a solitary goal, while Ken Poly bundled out Silver Bullets after defeating them 3-1. In a girls' competition, Golden Angels defeated Street Revolution 4-3 in post-match penalties after the game ended in a barren draw, while Embakasi United edged out St. Anne's Eaglets to book a slot in the quarterfinals scheduled for the start of next weekend. Well, how do you feel about running up a flight of stairs? The Standard Group team took the 3rd position in the media category in this year's anti-jigger staircase relay that was held at the Kenyatta International Conference Center in Nairobi. The relay, named the Sportipesa Relay, brought together over 50 different organizations to participate in the support of the anti-jigger campaign. Competition was in different categories, including from government, media, students, NGOs, among others. Ahadi Kenya hopes to continue with the relay in coming years to raise funds to fight jiggers in the country.
Okay, so we're back, and what do we want to do? We want to get into your feedback. Some of it I won't get into, with silver medals, or so are they winning medals, or was it metal they were taking?
You couldn't let that.
You should
one
stop
go,
hanging out with me and people from my region.
Go.
No, I'm reading feedback. Edna Nafula says,
No.
Silver what?
Edna, you are misinformed. I think there was something happening with the TV there. I said medals. I didn't say metals.
Okay, that's fine. Whatever you say. All right. So let's get into the feedback tonight on the discussion about sugar. Benji says, Kenyans should remember that people in Central Province shifted from coffee farming to horticulture when KPC, that's the Kenya Planters Cooperative Union, fell. Diversify is what he says.
Eric Ndach says the sugar deal currently makes our local sugar a luxury and not a necessity, referring of course to what happened last week with the sugar deal in terms of the expense. How expensive
how
our
much
sugar
it costs.
is.
Yeah, that's right. Abdul, watching us in Nakuru County, says government should stop politics on sugar because this is how cotton growing stopped, just by importing second-hand clothes into the country.
Let me see if I can get one. Morris Onyango says, what has Malawi or Brazil done to reduce the cost of sugar production? This is what we ought to do here in Kenya.
It's all about land. There was something interesting that Anzesa said. Well, we're talking about cane. How about we talk about adding value to that and start talking about the sucrose content?
Yes.
Because that's something that you would then have an edge, over the competitors in the region. And perhaps just doing what we do best and importing what we can't, and then starting to then export what we do best to the other countries in the region.
That's true.
So, just to think about.
But there were a lot of salient points that were made there about like what we're discussing during the break about sugar, the bringing down of the sugar industry, whether it's for land or it's to buy the factories themselves. So many points. You can catch that discussion again if you missed it online on our YouTube channel. Of course, this discussion will continue across the week here on KTN News. As we do, we will give you the whole story, not just the politics. My name is John Allen Namu. Have a good night.
Thanks for watching. My name is Yvonne Okwara Matoles. Stick with KTN News. Mock the Week with Wilson Burr is up next. Good night.